Phyllis was my cat. She died in 2018. She was 16 years old, and she was mine for 8 of those years. This video is about how she was the greatest cat that ever lived, and how cats, both when they're living and when they're dead, affect our lives. Here's the reasons why Phyllis was awesome. She was smart, affectionate, and annoying as shit. She would figure out how to open the food canister, understand that taking out my contact lenses meant that I was going to go to bed soon, and whenever I had sex, she would annoy us until I shut her out of the room. When she headbutted, she pushed hard into my skull like a soft punch. And when she made biscuits, it was on my neck, and she pumped as hard as she could until my neck got sore. When it was cold, she'd either use my skull as a pillow or hug my chest like how she's hugging the couch in this photo. It was my favorite thing, being hugged by my cat. When she was happy, she would make a weird noise. Cats are amazing. All cats are amazing. They're fascinating. I don't know about you, but to me, clearly 99% of their thoughts and actions are dedicated to murder, and yet that drive translates to this endless spring of love and affection. They're always staring at something, always taking in the world, always calculating. I get the impression that they have a very rich interior life. That's why they need to sleep all the time, to just shut off absorbing everything. Pets see you. I think that's one thing we undervalue when we think about how important pets are. Maybe I'm being narcissistic here, but there's something fulfilling about having a literal dumb thing watch you every day. It fills in the lines of your life and validates your experiences. They're like the Watcher in the Marvel comics. Most of the time, they don't do anything big to change your timeline, but instead they're always around witnessing the events of your life. You have a bad day or a good day, there's always someone there to greet you at the door or curl at your lap. And after a while, enough of these good days and bad days start to pile up, and all of a sudden a history is formed, and you know yourself better. This is important for me because my history with Phyllis began after a bad episode of my life. It was right after I finished college where I was going through a rough time. I just got out of a relationship I wasn't happy with. A very old friendship was falling apart. I was losing my apartment and I couldn't keep it together, so I was losing my mind. I did this thing where I cut off all my hair with safety scissors. At night, instead of sleeping in my own bed, I'd get into my car and drive to an empty parking lot and I'd sleep there. I burned over 100 of my own books in order to feel cleansed. In the middle of all of this, one day I heard meowing coming from our back porch. I went to investigate, and there were 3 kittens hidden in the filthy couch in our backyard. Each of them were crawling with fleas, passing in and out of consciousness, and looked as if their eyes were welded shut with crust. I ran back into the house, got a cardboard box, and then drove all the way to the nearest animal shelter, the whole time listening to a chorus of mews from kittens that weren't passed out yet. Eventually, I arrived at the animal shelter. A man built like a refrigerator took me in the back, took the cardboard box, and put the kittens into a cage. As he was doing this, I asked him what he thought was going to happen to the kittens, if they were going to put them to sleep. He said that they were going to be okay, but then he paused and bit his lip and looked me in the eye. Do you want me to tell you what you want to hear, or do you want me to tell you the truth? And then I left and cried all the way home. I've had worse things happen to me in my life, and I've had larger struggles with bigger losses, but hearing that the kittens were going to be put to sleep was the worst thing I've ever experienced. It's kind of like how the hardest you ever laughed is never at the funniest joke you've heard. Phyllis came after that. She came after the lowest point in my life, which meant that I had a silent, loving witness to all my successes and hardships and slow, gradual growth into an adult. Part of letting go of her is coming to terms with the fact that the size of our relationship has gone from 2 to 1. There are no more stories left to make together. There's nothing new to discover about one another. The language we spent the last 8 years constructing between each other has been erased by history. I do stand-up comedy, which means I'm often forced to confront the realities of death. When you do comedy, you're surrounded by a community of hundreds of bright, beautiful people, and a lot of them are broken or weren't built right in the first place, and sometimes that means you're subjected to saying goodbye to people before you're ready. There's other people you love that continue to live, but they live in such a rough, irresponsible way that loving them means confronting and processing the mortality on a daily basis.
That is very warm and is about sharing,
John.
and you're rejecting it because you like to push people away because you don't like you.
A lot of people are terrified of death, but I find the notion of not dying to be a more dreadful reality. This is how I felt since I was a kid. I remember being 7 years old and at the library and flipping through a Superman collection that spanned 80 years of comics and being terrified at the notion that he never stops going. He passes through time and history, and his story never ends. He just keeps going. After he finishes one battle, he has another one and another one and another one after that. Even when he dies, he's brought back. That's torture. I like fine arty art museum art stuff, and there's this famous piece by this dickbag named Damien Hirst called The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living. Basically, it's a dead shark and preservatives. That title always bothered me. The physical impossibility of death in the mind of someone living. That's death is death. It's simple. It's simple. It's nothingness. The reality of death is no more opaque than a good night of sleep. All of Damien Hirst's stuff is about death and money, and he tries to mystify the event. His views on death always seem solipsistic, as in inwardly pointed. There's something very privileged about this need to create reminders of death. It's an image that's been commissioned by the privileged elites throughout history. It's only worth saying you can't take it with you to somebody who has something to take in the first place. He frames death as being this individual act, but to me, death is a social event. I could push my argument to say that it's a political act. We might die alone, but when we reach that threshold, it really doesn't matter. You're not a thing anymore. You can no more die alone than you can divide by zero. Death is a social event. It involves your friends and family and that one guy you sort of hate. Think of the theater of carrying a casket. The most important people take on your weight. There's another artist, Mike Kelly. I like him. In this video, he's smearing his poop. And in this video, he's bringing onions to a homeless shelter he built. What a great guy, full of contradictions. He started out as a seminal punk rock drummer and transitioned into a career of making fantastic, weird, kind of grotesque art installations. When he talks about his stuff, he's very lucid and humble and always comes off as one of those chill, aging punk rockers you see in the What's My Bag videos. He had one piece that was this thing, and someone once asked him why this fence was here, and he explained it like this. It was the frame that was the most important thing in art, literally, as in that thing that goes around the painting. He asked his audience to imagine a Jackson Pollock painting without a frame, all those slashes and dots spilling out forever on an infinite plane. It would be meaningless. There'd be nothing to attach to. It was only with a frame, boundaries, that you have the context to appreciate what you see on the inside. Life is the same way. If it stretched on forever in an infinite plane, it would have no meaning. Our gains and losses and relationships would have no meaning. It is only with boundaries, the frame of our birth and last breath, that we can appreciate what's inside. To me, that's what we mean when we say that death gives meaning to life. In the past couple of years, I lived in New York and I was an artist and I struggled a lot. Living in New York meant that you had to make sacrifices, and as my financial situation got tighter and tighter, so did the size of where I lived and the amount of time I had to spend at home. There'd be stretches at a time where I'd roll out of bed, feed the cat, head to work, do a whole shift, and then do comedy till 3 a.m, and then come back and feed her again and fall straight asleep. As she advanced in the years, I started to feel bad for her. I worried that her shrinking space and lack of attention meant that she wasn't getting the right stimulation. Towards the end, she'd just find one spot in my bed and sit there for nearly the entire day. She didn't explore much, and she wasn't particularly active when I tried to play with her. I projected onto her that she was depressed and could have a better life than what I was giving her. Last year, I was on a 2-week vacation, and I left Phyllis to be watched by my roommate. She didn't eat the entire time. By the time I came back, she had developed a large growth on the side of her neck. What followed was a series of contradictory, confusing, and frustrating visits to the vet. Whatever the mass was, an infection or tumor or whatever, was difficult to discern. Phyllis's condition would better, then worsen, then better again. Her hunger would fade in and out. She would scratch so much at her mass that eventually I would come home to pools of blood that I would have to sop up with a towel. I bought a cone for her. One day I came home from work to discover that she ripped off the cone and was laying in her own blood, breathing shallowly. I called the vet, and he told me that it's probably best I bring her over for one last time. My girlfriend was out of town at the time, so I asked my roommate to come with me to the pet hospital. Phyllis always hated cat carriers, travel, being in cars, and she whined the entire way there. At the vet, we took her down into the basement. They hooked her up, sedated her, And then I held her paw as the last breaths left her body. We left the hospital. My roommate had to leave and she walked down the opposite side of the street. I turned and walked towards the bus. I was shell-shocked. A friend I knew just happened to be walking past at this time, and I could see in the shocked look of recognition on her face when she saw me shuffling down the sidewalk with tears rolling down my eyes and an open, empty cat carrier. In college, shortly after I had those kittens murdered, I now had Phyllis, and I was explaining to my roommate at the time that he shouldn't leave the door open wide because Phyllis would try to escape. He found this rule weird and asked me how I could say that my cat loved me if she would try to escape. He asked how any pet can feel love, when love is a mere human construct. He seriously asked me that. We were both in film school, and he liked Kubrick a lot, and he put a lot of effort to model his personality after that genius filmmaker type, like cold, rational, as if his intellectual pursuits are far beyond simple human emotion. It's a trap that a lot of men in their early 20s fall into, where you fetishize rationality and downplay the importance of emotion. You see echoes of this mentality a lot in the media. Rick Sanchez, Don Draper, Jeff Winger types. I see it quite a bit in my YouTube suggested videos, where you can find out how to shut down an argument or be like Don Draper, even though the entire arc of the TV show is to learn how not to be like Don Draper.
It's a power fantasy where a cool dude steps in and explains the cold, nihilistic truth to the normies.
Focus on science.
To me, this is not rationality. It mistakes a lack of emotional intelligence as a sign of intelligence. It's the idea that if something is a social construct, it must be fake or disingenuous, even though the entire shape of our world is carved by emotions. Paradoxically, I think this comes out of a fear of vulnerability, the lack of control that comes out of the revelation that we're all dependent on each other. Still, I thought about the question my roommate asked me a lot. I thought about it for years, because I couldn't justify my love for Phyllis in this linear, literal way. She's just a cat. As I grew and matured, I think I came to the conclusion that love isn't a feeling, it's an action. It's a thing you do. It's a reflex. It's meowing intensely when I come home from a rough day. It's never being done with making biscuits on my neck. There's no one type of love any more than there's one type of face. And what if she did escape, and she found another family and got fat with them? That means she could easily transfer her affection from one person to another. That's a strength, not a defect. She can express universal love, agape, which is a type of love a lot of humans struggle with. But also, she had a specific love for me and could recognize me distinctly from others. We shared with each other a weird language that was exclusively our own. Anyways, she was the most awesome cat in the world and my favorite person, and I'm proud that I got to hold the paw of somebody so incredible as she went to sleep for the last time. All right, let's